happy Wednesday and welcome back to #WhyWeVote, an interview series where we highlight unique and diverse American stories, all in the hopes of encouraging you to turn out and vote. My name is Griff Stark-Ennis and I'm your series host. Next week is Election Day here in the US, which sadly means that this is our last episode, and it's a great one. But before I introduce you to my final guest, I wanted to take a second to thank the team that helped me put together this series in such an incredible way. Kelsey Flynn, Ben Olcott, Isaac Morin, Terrence Levy, Hannah Kiefert, Myra Malloy, and everyone else at Art Save the Vote. Thank you so much for helping me share these stories. Now, you know our next guest from RuPaul's Drag Race, Broadway's The Go-Go's, Pose, social media. You know her from everywhere. I'm of course talking about the one and only Peppermint. Together we talked about her experience on and off stage as a Black trans woman, the difference between being non-racist and anti-racist, the inspiration behind her recently released album, and of course, the inspiration behind her upcoming presidential vote. So, stay safe, stay active, and enjoy the conversation. Hi there, how are you?
Hello, darling. I'm fabulous. And you look fabulous. I hope you're doing well.
Oh, thank you. We both do. I cannot believe I said it before, I'll say it again. I can't believe I'm sitting down and talking with you. I turned to Drag Race during quarantine to find some inspiration and uplifting. And obviously I saw you come across the screen for season 9 and I was so impressed. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh my God, my pleasure. I mean, I'm so happy to be sitting down with you, and I can't believe you found something uplifting on Drag Race. Just kidding. It can be an uplifting show. It's also got the perfect balance of shade and craziness as well.
It was everything I needed. And before we started this, actually, I haven't been wearing pants a ton during quarantine like everyone else. And so I put this old pair of jeans on, and I kid you not, this is not fake. I had a peppermint in my pocket. And so I think this was meant to be. I don't know.
It is a fate. We're destined. What can I say? What can you say?
I started smiling and giggling so hard it was perfect.
It's perfect.
Well, I would love to start by asking, I think we share something in common in that we're both from the East Coast here in the United States. I grew up on a small farm in northern New York. And I know that you grew up and spent time in Pennsylvania and Delaware, and then obviously New York City. And I guess my first question is, how was that upbringing and that East Coast cultivation? How has that affected and impacted who you are and what you're doing?
I don't really know. I don't really have that much to compare. But I really, every single time somebody asks me, am I going to move out west? As much as I love spending time on the West Coast, and there's so many beautiful things that the West Coast has that the East Coast will never have. I really wholly consider myself an East Coast girl, and so the East Coast definitely has made its mark on me. I guess the most tangible thing for it that I can think of is I really enjoy two things about the East Coast. I enjoy the fact that you can travel up and down the entire coast and literally see the seasons change. Mm-hmm. And I love the fact, and I love, outside of climate change, love having 4 seasons when we actually do have 4 distinct seasons. But I do love autumn and that's autumn and spring, which are, I think, particularly, well, autumn and winter, I guess, are the 2 that are missing from some of the West Coast. And so I love that. But then I also really like being able to be in either, Boston or Philadelphia in a very short amount of time. And I just think it's nice to be able to go from state to state to state because there's, we're more condensed on the East Coast. And so I do like that. And then I love New York.
Yeah. New York is amazing. I actually moved to Los Angeles from Boston. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I love it. It's obviously super different than Los Angeles, but it's good to get back. And I agree. I loved being able to travel up and down and see different states. And California is great, but it's different. It's just different, right?
Yeah, it's just different. It offers something completely different. There's no substitute for either one of them, I think.
Exactly.
Especially when you're talking about Los Angeles and New York, which are very distinctive.
Yeah, I think it's like comparing apples and oranges because I get that question all the time. You gotta.
And people do want to have that fight. I mean, it's the fight has been established between East and West Coast. But I do think it's a shame. I don't think that there is, there is, the fight is going to be never ending.
Yeah.
Because they are not the same thing.
Exactly. They're they're completely different. But I guess so we'll continue to fight about it, or people will. Now, second question, it pertains to New York City and kind of your rise to prominence there. You have clearly an extensive theater and music background, and started performing at a very early age. And then, of course, moving to New York and just blowing up. All of this, of course, led you to Drag Race. Did you always know that you were meant to be in front of the camera? I have a unique perspective on this for myself. And then what inspired you to audition for Drag Race when you did?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I always felt that I wanted to be like in the business, the industry of performing and acting and TV and film as it is today. I don't think I was aware of even what that meant until I was actually in it. Mm-hmm. And it is for I think for all intents and purposes, it is a very different thing. It's involves some of what we assume about the business, but there's so much about it that people just never know, would never know until you're in it. And so from that perspective, I didn't really always dream of it. But I always found joy in just being a performer. And so I think that was evident as a little kid. Family would always say, "Oh, you're so creative and blah, 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 and entertaining." And I think they hated it, but my family would be like, "Okay, darling, we're eating." But so that was kind of my upbringing. And then, I always found an opportunity. I was looked for an opportunity to put on a show. And so I do think that has always been something that's brought me joy. Whether I was in the business or not, I think that would have continued to bring me joy performing, because you can perform without being on television, right? And so I think as long as I actually am able to find that joy in actually performing and being creative, then everything else is kind of secondary. I'm not saying I'm not thankful for the things that I've had and done, and the opportunities and the wonderful things that I've been able to see and be a part of. And I would like to do more of those things, but it's not, luckily, the thing that I'm able to get the most joy from is the purest form of entertaining.
Yeah. Just making someone feel, and that comes in
various... So basically having sex. Just kidding.
What's that? I don't know what that is. Which is arguably a performance as well. Which
yeah.
And I think you touched upon a really interesting point in that so many people think that they know what this industry entails because they see, you or me, and then they see the final product of what is being pushed. They don't see the in-betweens, they don't see the hardships, they don't see so much, like 90% of what's happening. In my first interview, actually, I sat down with Brandon Michael Nace, who's actually based in Brooklyn, New York, and is the founder of Broadway for Racial Justice. And he, for me and our audience, I think helped shine some light on how a community that is known for being open and tolerant is still plagued by, specifically for him and what he's fighting against, racism and prejudices of that which are mostly subtle and microaggressive. So I guess, for those that don't know, and everyone should, you were the first trans woman to originate a principal role on Broadway. And I guess my question is, what was your experience like as a pioneer in that regard? And then just overall as a Black performer in New York City, namely on the stage?
Well, I have to say it was an honor for sure. It was my first Broadway show, and I'd studied musical theater performance in college, so I felt prepared for the singing and the the acting part of it. But just being able to be a part of a community like Broadway that has so much tradition and so much prestige was wonderful. By the same token, it was interesting to be in this realm that was so locked, I would say stifled, steeped in, if not stifled, and held back by its own kind of and being intoxicated by its own tradition. And I think that traditions are important. I do think that traditions are significant in the theater world. They are, or in the theatrical world, because they do set up a sort of code of conduct that isn't necessarily self-explanatory. I mean, most people, when they get into acting, they have no idea. It's just so foreign. The technical pieces of acting that make it successful for the audience are things that the audience will never understand.
Absolutely.
You know, like the simplest thing is like stage left and stage right. The fact that that's reverse will throw somebody for a loop. You know, things like that. And so I do think that having some tradition and some practices and things are and customs are important, but to the point where it upholds structural and systemic racism, misogyny, and even homophobia, meaning that it's so interesting to me that the theater is such a safe space for queer people, but most of the leads on Broadway, in the United States, the most professional and highest and most prestigious professional theater industry, all the leads are heterosexual. Even the gay roles are played by straight folks, typically. And then all of the queer folks are in the background as the dancers, which is great. They can move, darling. That's good. But, you know, it just goes to show that some of the same old Hollywood traditions, I think, moved their way over to Broadway or stayed in Broadway. And Hollywood, being so global and something that's accessible to everyone, film and television, had to change and update themselves in a much more obvious way. Broadway's not that accessible. You have to be rich and in New York City to go. And so, you know, that really limits a lot of people. So I do think it's really interesting that 2020 has been a year of sort of reckoning on many of those fronts in regards to a lot of those conversations. And I think the film industry has started to address it. There's a lot more to do. The TV industry is, interestingly enough, probably leading as a whole in terms of its diversity and inclusion and striving to sort of make things right. And Broadway is trailing, honey. Broadway's still in the last century. And so they have an opportunity, like, honestly, no industry will make, I believe that no industry will make it out of 2020 unless they've actually done the work to be more inclusive in the future. And it starts now, and we'll be checking 2021. Nobody's opening up a Broadway show without us making sure that things are correct. And they've gotten away with it for far too long. And so the industry of Broadway has been very blessed to have this break that they're unable to open. And just like industries but businesses and everything cannot open until they have their COVID protocol together. On the lower level of that, you cannot open until you have your racism in check. And we're looking.
For sure. It's made people, industries, stakeholders, it's forced them to stop. And if they can't be producing and showing, what they're working on to audiences, then they have to look at their internal business. And oftentimes, especially for what we're working in, and you bring up a great point that Broadway is rooted, I think more rooted in tradition in that you see it live. Tickets are very expensive. They're not the same as a movie ticket. You can't access it from your home, except we did see that with Hamilton, with Disney Plus, which is really cool.
And now there's a whole another fight between the unions. I don't know if you know about that.
I don't know much about
that. Actors Equity, which is basically SAG for its film for theater stage, is coming for. I don't really know the full tea, but obviously it looks like there's going to be more streaming in Broadway's future and in professional theater's future, as it should be. Everyone uses a screen these days. Yeah. And so SAG was already on that and so that they already kind of were in that world. And Equity is catching up to that, and now they're butting heads, and
Yes.
it's getting nasty.
Yeah, I did see the emails.
And it's unfortunate because our healthcare is at stake.
Yeah.
Sorry to be so.
No, we should. This is our livelihood. And I actually, you brought it up, and I have seen, because I'm a member of SAG, I've seen the emails come through where they're at least highlighting their side of their perspective in terms of the butting heads. And I do owe it to myself, especially as a new member of SAG, to like understand what's going on with that.
Yeah. We read I read both emails, and they are both they both have they both have a legitimate concern. It's just, it is really interesting. Is anything on screen? I mean, this is a whole nother topic, but I guess the question is anything on screen something that should be the domain of SAG? And then the other question is, does anything in theater, whether it's on screen or not, is that the domain of equity? And I guess that's what they're trying to sort out.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's good that they are, because that showcases to us at least that things are changing, and you can't have change without reconfiguring things that are upholding that change. And, I think change for the better means that things that have worked historically for certain people will have to be re-examined and just structured for, a new platform, a new distribution, or new talent, We're starting a new union, and we're going to get rid of all that. How about that? Yeah.
Then then they'll figure out a solution real quick.
Yeah. We'll chat offline. We'll start one together, and they'll be shaking in their boots. I think you brought up a really good point, and what we were talking about with your experience on Broadway, and obviously Brandon highlighted some incredible points when I chatted with him. I did listen to your conversation with Sasha Valora on your YouTube channel, and I honestly think it's a must-watch for everyone. I thought it offered more tidbits of education than anything, just hearing two incredible people with unique perspectives talk, which is kind of what I structured this around a few months ago. And, one topic that you both brought up that really resonated with me was the role of the ally. We chatted before we started recording. I came up in a majority white hetero environment, and many of my best friends who I love and who love me consider themselves allies with everything that you and I are fighting for, because we have to. But you and Sasha called out and highlighted that many of our allies, namely our white friends, tend to shy away when the going gets tough. And so for our viewers that haven't seen that video and just aren't, as familiar with that role, why in your opinion is the fleeting commitment of our, white ally community a huge issue in regards to what we're all fighting for? And then, what in your opinion also is the difference between being non-racist and anti-racist, which you also talked about?
Well, I just think that, we, especially, look, I guess in the past it worked to just be like, hey, I'm not a racist. And kind of, this sort of surface, really, 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 really obvious pieces of racism, and also honestly homophobia and transphobia and misogyny. And I mean, the bottom line is, I don't think that racism can thrive in a world that misogyny, which is related to homophobia and transphobia, racism can't thrive in an environment that misogyny also can't thrive in. Like, it can't. If you have people that are anti-misogynist and busting that out, eventually that's going to stop racism as well, because those two things intersect, and vice versa. You can't be, I'm not saying that, the two things don't have their own unique points and effects, but I'm saying the environment that breeds and allows racism to flourish and thrive and reproduce is also this same type of environment that allows misogyny and homophobia and transphobia to do the same thing. An environment of ignorance. And so I do believe that honey, it's almost like, if anybody's ever seen the Gremlins, we all know, like, it's the Gremlins. There's 3 rules. Don't feed them after midnight. Don't get them wet. And never shine bright light on them. Like, those are the rules. But then in part 2 of the Gremlins, right, it was called Gremlins, The New Batch. And honey, the rules have changed. Then all of a sudden, there's waterproof gremlins, and gremlins that can turn. They got into a science lab and drank the potions.
Yeah.
And now, after they drank the potions, they can turn into electricity. And one had wings and could injected UV sunblock into him, so he could fly around in the sun. So the rules have all changed, and I think the same thing has happened with racists and homophobes and transphobes in 2020. They are playing by a whole new game, and so we have to update our game too. And that means we can't bring just old run-of-the-mill allies with us who are like, homophobia is wrong, racism's wrong. It has to be more than that.
Yeah.
It needs to be like, I'm going to put on my battle armor and I'm going to go slay. Well, I mean, we're not going to physically harm people, but, I'm going to destroy racism. And one of the things that I think the first step to that for everyone, and this is how I can tell people are genuine or disingenuous about speaking about racism in particular, or transphobia and homophobia, is when they only talk about racism in the context of actions from, in terms of kind of categorizing a person as a racist.
Yeah.
They only acknowledge he's a racist. Maybe what you said is racist with a T. It always ends with a T. But they don't understand racism, the practice of, the system of, the structure of. It's not one human that is, it's not, you can't like ban one human, then racism is gone. It's an idea. And I think that's the problem that a lot of, that's how you can tell if somebody's just doing it for show and more performative, if they're really in it to say, oh, this is a thing. I was talking with a friend of mine who didn't want to admit that. And I was like, okay, she's a lady. And I was talking to her and asked her, okay, you don't believe in systemic racism. You think it's not a thing, but you understand that there are people who are racist. That's what you'll admit. Okay. So when we talk about, misogyny, and we talk about like someone who is, spousal abuse and domestic violence and beats their wife, do you think that the entire topic this will never be discussed again and will never be a problem if we just go into the households that have the guy beating their wife or being a misogynist and get rid of them and like move them out? Or what about the one boss who doesn't want to pay the woman equally? If we just fire that boss, is that going to change the whole thing? No, because it's an idea and a system. I know you get it, but like that was kind of how I had to explain it to her. That it was like, this is so much more than just one person. And I think that's where we have to start. But we do need allies to come with us and take their proverbial, anti-racism, steroid superpower, whatever, and beef it up and like get ready to rumble.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're more like accomplices. That's what we're calling them these days.
It reminds me, I don't know if you know what a hydra is. Like, I just watched Hercules for the first time. Don't critique me. It was my first time, but it's this beast that has 3 heads, and you cut off 1 head and 2 grow back in its place. And that kind of is like the metaphor you're describing. It's easy to cut those heads off and to label a person as racist. It's harder to figure out how to destroy the body that's upholding those heads or those races.
Exactly.
Because it's intangible. Like for us, it's not a beast. It's subliminal. It's structural. It's societal, and it's overwhelming to look at. I mean, during this entire time, I've been just so overwhelmed from my perspective, and I'm just trying to do what I can.
It was overwhelming.
Yeah, it's a big task. I think another thing that I had experienced moving to Los Angeles, I live in West Hollywood, capital of gay America, and I started, sorry, New York might be a little annoyed with that.
Well, I mean, I think San Francisco might have something to say about that.
I've got to be careful then. Whatever. So I moved to WeHo, and I, started to go out to gay bars and just, immerse myself in gay culture, at least where I grew up on the East Coast. It wasn't as readily accessible. And I think one thing that I've loved it, I think the community is incredible, but I think to everything we're talking about, I've noticed that I go into gay bars and there's majority white people, and then there's pockets of brown people that are clustered together and doesn't seem very integrated.
I found that same thing in New York.
Yeah, I I guess like I get frustrated at the idea of racism and homophobia in general, two things that I am I'm battling against because I am queer and I'm Black. How on earth do we get people that don't identify as either of those things to fight for us if the people within our own community aren't fighting with us as well? I don't know what to do with that.
I don't know. I mean, I guess that's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know. I think engaging all of these people so that they understand that these issues are intertwined, I think is one step. And I think, when we talk about things like homophobia and transphobia, again, I mean, it's back to what I said is I don't think any of these things can thrive without each other. And so when we talk about transphobia, when we speak with, cis women about, whether or not trans women should be allowed here or there or in that room or in this club or that club, and should we limit them and restrict them and examine them to make sure that they got this and that, and then, but doing that means that all women are up for negotiation, and then none of them are free. And I think that women have certainly felt that for years, even aside from about transness. But how people uphold and perform femininity is always scrutinized and judged by the people who are not necessarily the ones who are upholding the femininity, and then also, of course, there are cis women and women in general who uphold the binary and support misogyny and the patriarchy, and just as vehemently as cis men do. But I think that there is no way to sort of topple the patriarchy, which is what is watching over and keeping misogyny floating. And then misogyny is what is feeding all of the homophobia and transphobia, I believe. It may be positioned differently, but in any event, we can't really dismantle the patriarchy without the help of those who have the keys to it.
Yeah.
And the same thing with racism. And so it's important that, queer white folks understand that, yes, we are a discriminated class of people as queer people and as LGBTQ people, but there is, and I think people are understanding that these days, that there is a benefit in this country if you are white, and there's a disadvantage if you're a person of color. Yeah. There's no other way. I mean, you cannot, it's very difficult to deny when you look at our history.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't, and it's frustrating to even have, we need to be having conversations to help people realize that, but the fact that realization isn't achieved by themselves is very frustrating to me. And again, especially I think coming from where I do, where I actively need to be having these conversations.
Exactly.
Switching gears a little bit, and I think it's super relevant to what we're talking about. Your latest album, the first of 3 EPs, if I'm not mistaken, was released last week. A Girl Like Me, Letters to My Lovers. I listened to it. It's incredible. I think.
Thank you.
Of course, I think the sound across the album is a nice duality of sexiness and then also vulnerability, which I think go hand in hand, but are very rarely paired together, especially in the music industry. So, I was personally drawn to Girl Like Me. I think that song is absolutely beautiful. It's obviously the title of the EP. Well done and amazing work with that. But from your end, what inspired this tone and these poignant songs included on this album? Because I've listened to your work before, and it's, at least from my perspective, it's kind of a change in sound and direction.
Yeah, I've had a lot of fun in the past with my previous songs, like, Shady Phone and Dollar in My Titty. But I wanted to, and Serving It Up, I wanted to go a little bit deeper. I had recently had a really, significant relationship and breakup. It lasted about a year, and I was obviously devastated, but eventually I started writing in my diary, and then ended up putting my diary basically to music, turning that into songs. And I wanted to share that with everybody in a really open and honest way. And so, which I knew meant being vulnerable and being open to being vulnerable and allowing myself to be vulnerable. And just all the things that we don't necessarily think of when we think of like drag queen music. And so this isn't really drag queen music. This is just a woman talking about her experiences, but I have worked as a drag queen. And so I wanted to be able to distinguish it and present it in a way that just was like almost as if I just got out of the shower. Yeah. Although obviously, you know, I'm not totally, you know, dripping wet. I'm a little powdered.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we go like this. But I think it needed that. It needed sort of to kind of shed all that. And it's my first time doing that. And I think doing drag and just being like hardy R is fun. It's entertaining to people. It's non-threatening. Yeah. It's sexually non-threatening. It's really easy to think, oh, this drag queen, there's nothing sexual about them. They're just an entertainer. Yeah. And they don't have wants and dreams and hopes, but we are human. And so I wanted to be able to show that, especially considering that we are in the most deadly year for transgender women in the history of this country on record, 33, only 7 months in. At this rate, we'll be up to 40 or 50 by the end of the year. And that will be nearly double what it was last year. Mm-hmm. And so that is so important to me. It's enough to want to not sing about putting dollars in my titties for now, and really try to highlight what I think is important. These trans folks are not just dropping dead like flies. These trans folks are being murdered by our partners, by our intimate partners, our lovers, our husbands, whoever is tasked with loving us, and they're killing us. And they're not killing us because they like to kill us. They're killing us because as much as they are into us or attracted to us or love us, they're killing us because they would rather kill us than be scrutinized by the people, the men around them. The patriarchy, the misogyny has worked its way. The toxic masculinity has made it so a man would rather kill a woman or a trans woman than be ostracized by other men. And so it's important to uplift and highlight the examples of folks who are not killing us, but in fact loving us publicly. Yeah. Cornel West says justice is what love looks like in public. And that's really important that these relationships are shown. I want people in film and television and mainstream media to highlight the relationships between trans people and their partners in a way that's not stigmatizing. Every single time we hear about a celebrity who's involved at all with a trans person, and particularly a trans woman, and you know, then it's like, oh, did you hear about so-and-so? Oh, are they really gay? Like, yeah. That's kind of the talk. And so it's important to kind of work against that. And so that's why I wanted to put out this album.
Yeah. Well, I will say as a queer listener, I think, and it goes back to what we said earlier with straight men or women on Broadway playing roles of queer people. And we see that in Hollywood. I get frustrated by it when I see a movie like that. So even just listening to your seemingly very authentic album, it resonated with me as a queer person. You know, we're different in regards to a lot of things, but just hearing your story told authentically and from you really resonated with me. It hit in a way that I haven't felt in listening to a lot of other music. It wasn't, Thank you. Yeah, it was just incredible. And I think so many people out there would agree that voices like yours and hopefully mine one day will resonate with more people than people think. And I think especially in our industry, they need to get over the fact that, or the fear that people like us won't be relatable or won't have stories that connect with anyone. Because like you said, I mean, love should be unconditional. And that means period, you know, that's
there are exceptions obviously to every rule, but it's just like literally the word that people like us, they fear that people like us won't be relatable. But like when you take it back to the English language, the subject of that sentence is people. We're humans. People are relatable, period. Mm-hmm. All people are relatable.
Yeah.
Now, if you're talking about a human and a cat, then maybe there's some differences there. And there's like, I don't understand why that dog or cat does that. But humans, honey, I don't think there's almost merely, other than murder and crime, which are very, you know, we all seem to agree that those things are not good. Pretty much anything that a human does is relatable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep. You just have to, sometimes it's not as like obvious, and you have to just sit with the emotion that might be confusing. And then if you just don't judge and you sit with things and you try to understand, people would be surprised by how relatable anything is. It's just a matter of getting people to that point of empathy.
I think that's one of the interesting things. I spent a lot of time, sorting through a lot of like swiping left and right to figure out like a good partner for myself, who would be, understanding and caring and loving. And those things are important. There's a lot of education that needs to happen. But by the same token, at the end of the day, the relationship that I was in most recently, the one that this album is about, having him understand who I was and what it's like to be a trans woman may or may not be very easy to have, but he knew that he was into me. And so that, and we had, we were past all of those things. And then at the end of the day, the real thing was, are we even compatible? Period. Do we have, the fights that we had were the same fights about the toothpaste in the bathroom. Why did you leave the toilet seat? Like, it's the same thing. It's, it doesn't, you don't have to be queer to understand that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, I think those are some of the same arguments that gay couples and other queer couples and partnerships go through, that when it comes to love, that heterosexual people just think that, oh, queer people are so, we don't understand. No, yeah, it's the same thing. We're fighting, we're upset, we get jealous, we resentful, people cheat, people argue. Hey, oh, I think we froze. Oh, there you go.
There we go. We're back. But yeah,
did I finish that? Were you able to finish that? Did you hear that?
Okay. I did hear it. Yeah, I hear it. We'll see if our viewers hear it when we post it. But no, I completely agree. Those are great little examples. Like, it's just packaged differently. Like, the core is similar. It's just packaged and it will look different. Work past it. Just work past it. Like, we're all different. And, I think closing out, I've been asking all of my guests, and you highlighted the importance, I think, on a national level of issues within the trans community, but obviously issues that we're feeling as a more collective whole, I suppose. Obviously, in a few days, really, from this point, we will be electing a new president of the United States. Millions of people have already cast their mail-at-home ballots. They'll be going to the polls if that's more comfortable for them.
22, I think.
What's that?
22 million, I think, so far, something like that.
Yeah, which is incredible. And I'm going to be submitting mine today. I'll be 22,000,001. What's fueling your vote this year with everything we've talked about, with everything that we've all gone through 2020 and the last 4 years, in all honesty? When you go to mark your ballot and turn that in, what's fueling that?
My participation in the system has always been, I try my best to always participate. Sometimes when there's a special election and I'm traveling and I hadn't, applied for absentee, if it's local and things like that, it's been really difficult in terms of like the actual like process. But I try to stay engaged, and I just generally think it was something that comes easy to me because I'm interested in it. But this time around, it's obvious. I mean, the presidential elections are always the ones that get the most play, the ones that people, are the most into and kind of get the most, heated.
Yeah, passionate.
And so I'm not surprised by that. But this year feels this year feels different. We've always had racism. This year, racism just came at us in a whole new way. We've always had a lot of these issues. This year, it's just come at us in a whole new way. We've always had presidential debates. Did you see that mess the other day? And so, it just seems different enough for everyone to be involved, I think. And so, I think that I know that there's a lot of people who the first thing that they're going to say is they're going to complain about one of the candidates or the other not being worthy of their vote and not being, we hear a lot about the apathy behind not wanting to vote. And I know that that's a real thing, the dissatisfaction from a lot of people. But at the end of the day, at the end of 7 days, basically, or whenever we're going to vote, we only have two choices. And, if you're living in this country, unless you are planning on not staying in this country, this is your home, this is your country. And we have a few opportunities to participate in it, and they're crossing a lot of those opportunities off the list. The people that are in control, we may have less options and opportunities to vote in the future than we do now.
Yeah.
So let's take advantage of it. Voting is one of the very crucial things we have to do to not turn into The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah. At one point, that show seemed like far off from reality, and it was just far off enough. And now I think within the last 4 years, it's like anyone who watches that show is like, nope. That's like, that could be, and that could be next year, you know? I think you hit the points that I resonate with. Like on a personal note, can no longer sit back and just wait until I have influence and power to make change. I think we can do it from wherever you are and whoever you are. If that means a single vote, do it, but do it. If that means starting a web series and chatting with incredible people like yourself, do it. And I did it. But yeah, it's today is, I keep saying, might be guaranteed, tomorrow might not be. So live for today and impact today. And on that note, I have to thank you so much for sitting down with me. This is very strange for me, as a big fan of yours, and someone who aspires to channel everything you're doing with your voice, both musically, politically, socially. And I couldn't think of a better person to have for our last episode before the election. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.